So last week we lost the great Carl Reiner. I use the word great advisedly. I think he was a great director because he was a director who was also a writer, who was also a comic. And having abilities in all those different fields makes, for me anyway, a much better director. One of his films which I think I loved the most when he was working with the great Steve Martin, and I use that word advisedly with him too, is Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. And given that we were talking about comedy fairly recently, I thought it'd be good to have a look at that movie in terms of its score. Now, it was a clever idea. It evidently came up because Carl Reiner and another producer and Steve Martin were having dinner and were talking about the idea of using a bit of old film footage and cutting Steve Martin in. And after a while, they took this further and thought, can we do an entire film in which Steve Martin is interacting with great actors from the past in mostly film noir? And they decided to try and make a film noir, private eye movie, which kind of both celebrated and sent up the whole genre of 1940s, 1950s noir. But in order to make it, they actually had to comb through every film made at that time to find little bits of dialogue, reaction shots, over-the-shoulder shots, which would allow them to put Steve Martin in saying whatever they gave him to say, but the actor or actress he was talking to, whether it be Betty Davis or whoever, would speak the lines that were in the original film, and Steve Martin would interact with them. And so you have him with Bogart, you have him with Jimmy Cagney, you have him dressed as a woman, you have him meeting Fred McMurray in the supermarket in Double Indemnity. And I mentioned Double Indemnity very specifically because in order to try and knit this whole thing together, they not only needed an editor and a cinematographer who all understood film noir, not to mention the great Edith Head, who was the costume designer who had dressed so many of the actors and actresses in those original films. She was brought back for this film. They particularly needed a composer who could work with the noir genre. And they had one guy in Hollywood who had actually scored quite a few of the films that they were looking at, who they handed the job to. And this, for me, was one of the very great Golden Age composers. He's right up there in the pantheon with Korngold and Bernard Herrmann and Max Steiner. And that is the very, very great Miklós Rózsa. Rózsa had a career in Europe, had a career in England. One of his first huge films was The Thief of Baghdad, that was shot in Pinewood and in America during the war. Came to America, stayed there. And he pretty much invented, for me anyway, two genres. One was Roman sounding music. He scored Ben-Hur. He scored Quo Vadis. So this is a man who understands, or has an idea of what ancient Rome sounds like, right? Now this is one particular, I think, that he did. Instead of a straight open chord, say, trumpet, something like that, doing. He basically added in one extra note, one there, so that what you get is this. It's a chord that could never have been in existence in Roman times. It's a chord that is purely from that man's brain. And that's because he was someone who understood how a thickness of chording allows for a kind of grey area, an area which sounds much more kind of thick and brutal than it actually is. And that comes from his work with film noir. Now, with Miklós Rózsa, I think there is such a thing as the noir chord. What Miklós Rózsa did was take an ordinary open chord, as I said, that one there. That's A, E, A, right? So that's an open one there. Now, if you throw in a G in there, you get what's called a seventh. So if you play a minor seventh, that's A, C, E, G. Then if you put the next note 2 above that, which is a ninth, Then the next note, 2 above that, which is an 11th. And if you want to be really cheeky, try the 13th above that. Suddenly you've got a big fat chord which has both major and minor in it. Now the noir chord is a major and minor chord. And what it does is it basically doesn't give you an absolute major or an absolute minor, but it can move to either very, very easily. So when Miklós Rózsa was handed the job by Billy Wilder of scoring Double Indemnity, he did this wonderful thing with the opening, which is, if you remember with Double Indemnity, it's a man coming towards you on crutches. So the theme does this. First chord, second chord, great big fat noir chord, third chord. Buy into that. That is just beautiful. And if you want to do it at home, it's D, A, F, B, E, A. That is Rózsa announcing, to me anyway, the arrival of a whole new sound. Because the thing about noir, obviously it's black and white, but also it deals with grey areas of morality. It deals with people who are not saints and not sinners, but are just like you and me. They're damaged, or they make bad decisions, or they don't quite do the right thing, because none of us do. And so noir was a set of crime movies in which there never were out-and-out villains and out-and-out heroes. They were just people, and often really, really bad endings. And it was at a time when if you did a crime, you weren't going to be allowed to get away with it, not in the movies. And so that sound is so kind of redolent of that period. So, back to Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. Miklós Rózsa was given the job of weaving a score, which every time they came to a piece of film where they were using a clip, and particularly if the music was playing in that clip, Miklós Rózsa's score had to be able to take it on board, include it. It's like sewing a massive tapestry of pieces of film together, but with a continuous musical score. And would you believe it, not only did he do it, but I've got the CD, I've listened to it, he made a most fantastic score out of it. This was to be Rózsa's final score. And in it, and I think he kind of realised this, he basically revisited and sent up his own previous scores. And if you listen to that opening section, it goes from the titles into a car crash straight off, which is very much a film noir thing. You start off with something really impressive. And you can hear how he has made that work. He's sewn it into the score. The great moment for me in that film, and it's one of those times when actually you can feel a little lump in your throat, is the end credits, when he basically writes 2 themes, the main theme for the film, fantastic, but then he adds the love theme that he's put there for the main protagonist, and this love theme is so much of its time, but it also takes the tune on a series of little rambles as it's going. So you get this fantastic can you hear within that theme, not only the big builds and the rest of it, but there's also tension. And that tension is about waiting for the resolution, holding that resolution. We've talked about this with Bernard Herrmann, and that's what he's doing there as well. In that lovely kind of apotheosis. That is a ninth. There's so much going on within the texture of that music. And remember, we're talking about a Steve Martin wacky comedy in which there's so much daftness in the great Steve Martin, Carl Reiner tradition, Man with Two Brains, The Jerk, etc., etc. But because they got Rózsa to score it, the opening of the film, the closing of the film, the whole world in which it happens feels redolent of genuine threat, genuine passion, albeit a dark passion, and that wonderful sense that noir gives you of the ground cracking beneath people's feet. And that is pure Miklós Rózsa. I don't think it would have worked if they hadn't got a composer who had been there and done the job back in 1940s and 1950s. And let's not forget, this is a composer who in 1962 kind of semi-gave up composing, or maybe Hollywood gave up on him. Tastes had changed. People didn't want the kind of sound that he produced. And for the next 10 years or more, he only scored the odd film. Thank goodness that the great Carl Reiner came for him and got him to score Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, because not only did he make a great comic movie, he grounded it in a noir reality that only someone like Rózsa would understand, and made the comedy, for me, even better. So R.I.P. Carl Reiner, and let's not forget the great Miklós Rózsa, and be thankful that he got one last chance to celebrate just how good he was.